guys, this is chapter 10, key issue 2. I'm trying to get it loaded here. This one's a lot of fun because we get to talk about food, which is a big part of agriculture because that's what it makes. So this one should actually be relatively quick. Hopefully my dogs aren't too loud in the background. They got a bunch of new toys for Christmas and I've been fighting over them ever since. So, anywho. Okay, so agriculture is what makes food. So the mechanization of agriculture, which would be the second agricultural revolution that we talked about in the last video, has led to increased food production. Okay, and more food equals better diets, reduction of undernourishment, longer life expectancies, and more people available for the workforce. So more food is a good thing. We are constantly trying to find ways to make more food. Sorry. Okay. So here's the thing though, and we talked about this a little bit last time too, is not everywhere grows everything. And with the Columbian Exchange, yes, now all over the world we have different types of food that are not indigenous to that area, but we can now grow those things. However, there are still some things that certain climates are more equipped to grow than other climates, okay? So because of this, we have regional specialization in agriculture, okay? And I'm going to give you a few examples of that. But basically, there are regions who specialize in growing a certain crop that they then distribute to the rest of the world who doesn't grow that crop, okay? So as far as world trade goes, food is a big part of that, okay? A lot of the food that we have is imported from other countries in the U.S., okay? A lot of our produce comes from Mexico, actually, because of NAFTA, which we will talk about a little bit next unit. So these patterns of food distribution and how world trade when it comes to food works can be affected by lots of different things. It can be political systems, right? We know that North Korea is a very isolated country because politically that is what the leadership has chosen. So there are countries that are more open to trade than other countries. It's just an example. Infrastructure, some countries have the airports or trains or roadways that make it easier to distribute food to their people, whereas there's countries who maybe don't have that kind of infrastructure, so it can be difficult to get food to those locations. And world trade agreements. As I just mentioned, NAFTA, we know in the EU, right, they have free trade, meaning they can trade products without any tariffs, and that includes things like food. Okay? So all the global trade things we've talked about, food is right along with that. Food is something that you can trade. Hey guys, why don't you go play outside? They're not going to. Okay, so here's an example of a specialization region. So we call this the bean belt, as in coffee beans, okay? So most of the, I don't know if you guys drink coffee yet, but most likely lots of you when you become adults will. Some of you maybe already do. I can't start any morning without a cup of coffee. So in the U.S. we consume a lot of coffee, but look at how we don't really grow a lot of coffee, okay? So a lot of this has to do with climate. You can notice like right along the equator here is some of the best places to grow coffee. So a lot of it comes from Africa. Colombian coffee is very, very famous. Some of my favorite coffees have come from Indonesia. They make really, really great coffee, okay? So that's called the bean belt. And I'm just going to show you here. So you will notice that some of the largest coffee consumers are the ones who don't actually grow any coffee. So again, this is world trade, right? All of the coffee is grown in this region, but look who loves their coffee the most. This is France, okay? They don't grow coffee, so lots of European countries love coffee. They don't grow it. The US loves coffee. They don't grow it. I'm surprised that Canada is not bigger. I guess they don't like coffee that much. So there's, you know, a discrepancy there. This is where it's grown. This is who consumes it. Remember, this is a cartogram, so it's based on size, right? Okie doke. Same thing with bananas. Bananas are a good example. Not everywhere grows bananas, but most countries consume bananas. So bananas are grown lots in Brazil, lots in China, which was surprising, a ton in India, okay? Lots in Africa. Africa's kind of like a nice hub for banana and plantain harvesting, okay? I think we get a lot of bananas from Brazil and a bit from Mexico. We get a lot of produce from Mexico. Okay? So this is another example of specialization. Okay? These regions specialize in the banana crop. We're going to talk about Africa in an activity in a little bit that has to deal with chocolate and cocoa beans. And cocoa beans are also a very specialized product. So coffee, bananas, cocoa beans, those are things that are grown in exclusive regions, specialized regions, not necessarily grown everywhere in the world. The other thing to point out is that a lot of these specialized locations are LDCs, right? They're the developing world selling to the more developed world. So, and that would seem like a good deal, but there's kind of an ugly side to a lot of this too, which we'll talk about a lot in the next unit. Sorry, I have the hiccups. Oh my goodness. Okay. This is something else I just wanted to point out to you. This is a Choropleth map that shows daily calorie intake per capita. The dark blue is the highest. So it shows you the U.S. is probably the most well-fed country in the world. I think our size would probably be good evidence of that, okay? Europe is also, Western Europe especially, not so much Eastern Europe, a very well-fed part of the world. But then, so some of these places are eating less than 2,000 calories a day, which is not a lot. So we would definitely call those people probably undernourished. It's just not enough food for someone to survive off of. But it just shows you the discrepancies, right? So you can definitely tell where even if you didn't know examples of MDCs, you could look at this map and say, like, it's got to be this one and it's got to be this area up here. Lots of the northern hemisphere, whereas the southern hemisphere, aside from like Australia and Brazil, way less caloric intake, okay? So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I mentioned in the last video, we're making more food than we've ever made before, but it's still not enough. And part of the problem is it's not evenly distributed, right? MDCs are well fed, other places not so much. Okay. So this was also interesting. This is meat consumption by capita. Food is another example of culture, which we talked about a little bit in our culture unit. Culturally, Teddy! Sorry. Meat is very important to the U.S. We eat a ton of meat. Australia also eats a ton of meat. But look, Africa does not eat a lot of meat, okay? And that kind of corresponds to this, right? They don't get a very nutritious diet. So that's really interesting. We also grow a lot of cattle. We don't grow cattle, we breed cattle in the U.S. So a lot of that makes sense. And then I just kind of want to go over some new movements in farming. So, you know, there's some historians who are almost calling what we're in now like the beginnings of a fourth agricultural revolution, where we're starting to be much more conscientious about where our food comes from and maybe have preferences as to how that food is being produced. Okay, so the organic movement, I'm sure, is something that most of you guys are familiar with. Organic farming is just farming without the use of pesticides. Okay, so if you guys grow your own vegetables, a lot of you guys probably have vegetable gardens at home and you don't use pesticides, you're making organic food, you're growing organic produce. Okay, so the problem with organic foods is, hey, pesticides cause food to the crops to be more successful, right? Because pests don't get at those crops. So organic farming leads to a lower food yield, less food is created. But there have been a lot of studies that have supported that pesticides are not things that we should be consuming. So that's kind of a new movement in agriculture. Fair trade, this kind of goes back to the bean belt that we were looking at and where bananas are grown, right? So fair trade is an agreement between producers and consumers where producers are promised a better deal than they would normally get, okay? So what was happening is a lot of MDCs were taking advantage of these LDCs and kind of treating them poorly in regards to kind of how their business deal was going. So fair trade, and you'll see this a lot on coffee and chocolate products, like pure cocoa products. It'll say fair trade. Starbucks, for example, I know has some fair trade coffee blends. And that just means that the company does things for the producers. Like, so maybe they promise them better wages. Maybe they do things like build hospitals or schools for that country. So basically, like, we have this trade deal, but we're also going to take care of you and make sure that you get a good deal out of this and that you get some of the help and resources that you need. Okay, so that works really well if it's something like coffee or chocolate where it's kind of a luxury product and the quality from those regions is way better than anything you could get in everywhere else in the world because the consumer wants that product. So companies are willing to help those people out to give them a better deal. But you kind of also have to, if you're an LDC who doesn't have one of those products, like it's not very likely that you would get a fair trade deal. Okay, and then local food movements. Is something else that has happened lately where people are trying to buy products that are within their own region. It helps to stimulate the local economy. I know even in Reno we have, well, I think it's an international thing, but there's like Black Friday and there's Cyber Monday, and I forget if it's a Tuesday or I think it's a Saturday, like where you go to like local businesses and things like that. I'm not giving a great example, but there's lots of restaurants in town who specialize in only using food that is locally grown. So and Reno is not the exception. Lots of cities all over the U.S. are very interested in the local food movement. So buying food, consuming food that comes from your own area. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about here is food deserts, and I'm pretty sure this is not in your book, so you definitely want to take good notes on this. So a food desert, when we say desert, it's not like in the middle of the Sahara. When we say desert, we're talking about areas where food, nutritious food, so like not McDonald's, is hard to get. So these are really common in impoverished urban areas. There's lots in Los Angeles, there's lots in Detroit, where basically within walking distance, there's no nutritious food that a person could get, okay? So a solution to this has been urban gardens, which you might see popping up in Reno, and then I know when I was in Chicago over the summer, there was a bunch of them. But basically using these urbanized areas to grow foods for the community. So that's one solution to food deserts. I'm going to show you a TED Talk about food deserts in class a little bit later, but basically it is a place where within walking distance, there's no available nutritious food. There's probably an Arby's around the corner, but there's no place where you could get fresh vegetables type of thing. Okay, so that is it for Key Issue 2. I will see you back here for Key Issue 3. Pop quiz. Always be ready.